Hello, thank you for the introduction. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Thomas Bermudez, and I will be presenting today alongside my co-researchers, Maddalena Esposito and Chayn Neuner, on the subject of stalkerware and its use in intimate partner violence situations. As researchers, our backgrounds, experiences, and prior knowledge is quite varied. We have all nonetheless found the topic at hand to be incredibly important and a concerning subject. Our research is part of a master's in public administration with a focus on digital technologies and policy within the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy Department at UCL, otherwise known as STEaPP. Additionally, this research is being carried out for Chayn, a volunteer network addressing gender-based violence. Chayn operates in the UK, Pakistan, India, and Italy through their online platform and activism on the part of its volunteers. Chayn is an organization run by and for survivors of gender-based violence, and it sees its functions as signposting relevant and useful services and providing access to information on topics related to gender-based violence. Maddalena will be expanding upon this later on in the presentation. With the introductions out of the way, let us get started with our presentation. So what is stalkerware? I will give you a quick rundown of the subject, but while you do, please head to sli.do, that is sli.do, and insert the code, which is 95917, so that you may answer some questions that we will be having throughout the presentation, and 3 specifically. But, and to clarify, we will not be using any data collected throughout this. This is an engagement tool, if you will, to keep the presentation flowing and entertaining, hopefully. So coming back to stalkerware, our working definition is technologies used to stalk or spy on others' activities via their infected devices. So for example, it could be a piece of software installed on a target's mobile phone, computer, or other device to record what they do on that device, where they go, as tracked by device location services, key logging, and the like. Importantly, however, stalkerware is an incredibly complex topic, and as such, we immediately start to question what technology actually fits under the umbrella of stalkerware. Stalkerware and its related terms, such as spouseware, spyware, and creepware, to name a few, generally refers to technologies used to stalk, track, and monitor others' activities through infected devices. The extent to which any one technology allows for this varies, and importantly, the intention of creation varies. mSpy, an image of which is shown on this slide, is an example of a program that other researchers have classified as stalkerware, and is currently available on Apple and Android app stores. mSpy lists functionalities including live GPS location tracking and contact list monitoring. While there are many apps like mSpy on app stores, including parental monitoring apps like mGuardian, a parental control app that lists amongst its functionalities the ability to monitor and block SMS, text messages, web browsing activity, application usage, and more, the complexity of the issue grows when we note that other products or services like Google Maps, Find My Phone, and Find My Friends also allow users to see the live location of others. While the intent of these applications might not be to allow stalking and harassment, their functions nonetheless enable these actions. Moreover, we are not just concerned with the technology available through app stores, but also ones that can be purchased directly from companies, websites, and online platforms, or through private individuals contacted via forums and other mechanisms. An example of such a program would be FlexiSpy, which is not on the app stores at the moment, but is available via a separate website, and again, notes its capacity, again, for location tracking, message and call monitoring, amongst other things. Later on, Jay will be expanding more into detail on the matters of stalkerware specifically. However, importantly, stalkerware by itself is only one part of our project. Our project is concerned with when these technologies are applied in the context of intimate partner violence. At these all these functions that I mentioned and more that will be mentioned are built upon, are used by perpetrators on others. Being able to track where someone is or who they can talk to, what information they can access through their personal devices, gives increased control to the user of Stalkerware. Moreover, it can affect not only the person whose phone has Stalkerware on it, but also any people who are dependent on them, including children. Importantly, participants in our project noted that there was a general need for research and awareness into intimate partner violence, not just Stalkerware. While a known common problem, it is often not talked about. Our project notes that its concern is not just the technology, but also the human relationships that are being impacted. Maddalena will now detail our approach to the subject and the layout of our project.
Thank you, Tomas. Hello, my name is Maddalena Esposito, and now I will give an overview of our project and lay out our research process. The title of our project as it stands is Mapping the State of Knowledge on the Use of Stalkerware in the Context of Intimate Partner Violence. Our project aims to map out the existing knowledge base and the state of research on the issue of Stalkerware. And specifically, our project aims include coalescing a shared understanding of the terms used and identifying critical gaps in past and ongoing research and policy, both of which may show the trajectory of this field and areas of improvement. Our research consists of 3 phases. The first one is a systematic literature review. The second one is a round of semi-structured interviews. And the final one is an online survey. The latter 2 phases we conducted with self-identified researchers and experts who work or have worked on and around the topic of technology-facilitated domestic and sexual violence and abuse, IPV, and cybersecurity. In line with the cross-cutting and interdisciplinary nature of this issue, we decided to recruit participants across different sectors, namely academia, the voluntary and statutory sectors, the tech sector, as well as the media. The insights gathered from both the interviews and the survey will inform a report, which, as mentioned before, will contribute along with the literature review to summarize the body of knowledge and evidence based on Stalkerware, describe the evolution of this research area, and underline any policy and research gaps. Our goal is to ultimately produce a guide for academics, policymakers, and interested organizations working on Stalkerware, which should aid to direct future research, policy decisions, as well as possible interventions for support organizations. I will now describe a little bit what was our research path. When we started out with our research in December, we're based at UCL, University College London, and our department STEaPP, called Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy, hosts a world-leading IoT research hub called Petra's National Center of Excellence, which produces cutting-edge research on IoT systems cybersecurity, of which our supervisor, Dr. Leonie Tanzer, is part. Dr. Tanzer has been working on a project about the implications of the IoT on victims of domestic violence and abuse called GIoT, so Gender and IoT. When approaching our dissertation, as I mentioned before, in December, into tech-facilitated abuse, we noticed with our supervisor that within the topic of tech-facilitated abuse, there seemed to be sparse knowledge about Stalkerware and research gaps around Stalkerware and IPV. However, it took us a few research proposals to find the right angle. In brainstorming ideas for how we could approach our research, we came up with many choices, all varying in angle and subject of study. But we noticed that all of our ideas were either outside of our resources or outside of our topical knowledge, or way too complicated to tackle within the scope of our degree. One thing that, however, we kept coming back to during the initial stages was that the research topic was, in fact, too sparse, and we could not get a comprehensive grasp of it. So for this reason, we decided to do a study that mapped the knowledge and the research on the topic. I would say that at the outset, excuse me, of our research, we intended to address a set of key issues and questions. Firstly, we wanted to understand who is currently doing research on this topic and who is currently addressing the topic. Secondly, we wanted to understand what terminology is used to describe Stalkerware. And this is because we want to contribute to creating a consensus or at least a clear understanding of the definition of Stalkerware, because we felt that without a clear agreed upon consensus on a definition, work on and around Stalkerware is increasingly difficult, not just for academics, but also for instance, anti-malware producers who need to know what and how to classify threats. Another key question that we wanted to respond to is what disciplines or sectors are currently giving attention to this topic. Then we wanted to understand how the different sectors are approaching and tackling this issue and where they're conducting research. Because one thing that we noticed, of course, is that Stalkerware is a transnational issue, and it is important to highlight where research is being currently carried out. And finally, we wanted to understand what were the research gaps that needed to be addressed. Our research path, however, was also dictated by the ethical implications of the possible avenues that we intended to take at the beginning of our project. Initially, for instance, we felt that it would have been very insightful to conduct interviews with survivors of IPV or domestic violence. In dealing with a subject that is connected to populations at risk, we needed to be very careful when deciding how we wanted to frame our research. And although there is a lot of work to be done with survivors of tech-enabled IPV, including Stalkerware, we felt that it was best not to approach this angle of the project, especially considering our time constraints and our lack of topical knowledge. Additionally, we also considered the angle of analyzing social media or public forums where perpetrators seek information, justify their actions, or look for products, and distribution lines for Stalkerware. Our concern here was, however, that both the research ethics regarding scraping data from forums and concern for our online safety and potential visibility of the project as the populations being researched might have been unhappy with our research and potentially target us. But ultimately, we do recognize that there is a lot of work to be done on this aspect of the issue as well. But as I mentioned, we probably didn't have the right means or expertise to do so. When considering our approach, we also had to consider the methodology by which we would carry out our research. And as mentioned before, within this, we had also considered our expertise and our existing knowledge constraints. While at several points we considered carrying out more technical or psychology-related studies, we recognized that we lacked this experience to conduct a study that was fair and useful. So we had to also consider the transnational aspect of the problem of Stalkerware, and any method or subject had to, in one way or another, acknowledge this aspect by either limiting it to a geographical or political region or take on the entirety of the issue, so analyze it globally. To illustrate this point, for instance, we considered scraping and analyzing data off of Google and Apple app stores, but we recognize that we would be getting skewed data because the three of us at that time, were living in the UK, but apps obviously can be put on the UK app store from other places geographically. So this approach would have not worked for an observation that was valid only for the UK. And moreover, we also had time constraints and ethics allowance constraints as well. So basically, when we decided to concentrate our efforts on mapping out the state of knowledge on Stalkerware and IPV, we set out on a current methodology that is inspired by the 2015 paper by Lee Jarvis and Stuart McDonald on cyberterrorism called "What is Cyberterrorism? Findings from a Survey of Researchers," which basically employed a survey of the global research community to gauge the definitions and understanding of the concept of cyberterrorism. Jarvis and McDonald's approach is justified on three principal ambitions. The first one was to map the areas of consensus, disagreement, and ambiguity around the term cyberterrorism. The second one was to understand whether these definitional issues had an impact on research and policy discussions on the matter. And the third one was to map out the research activity in the area, including possible research avenues that were unexplored until that moment. To address these three ambitions, they first conducted a literature review to set the grounds of existing research on the topic. Through this literature review, they then identified key researchers and professionals working in the area, and subsequently they addressed these identified researchers and invited them to complete a survey. We found that Jarvis and McDonald's, what they said to do in their article resonated with some of the questions that we had been asking ourselves while we were coming up with a proposal, namely the lack of an agreed definition for policy and research, the transnational nature of the problem, and the fragmented research field. We felt that we could easily transpose this to the state of the art on Stalkerware and designed our methodology accordingly, as I mentioned briefly above. I'm going to outline briefly our methodology. As I said, the first stage was a literature review, and for our literature review, we carried out several searches, refining search terms and density of relevant results until conducting a final search via the database ProQuest. The goal of the literature review was to get as complete of a summary of existing tests across multiple kinds of publication and approaches to the subject of Stalkerware and IPV, and note existing knowledge within the spheres of academia, journalism, and other source types. Additionally, we used factors including methodology and topic within the realm of Stalkerware and intimate partner violence to triangulate relevant resources. Our final raw search was of approximately 1,200 sources, from which we extracted about 200 relevant sources as we defined relevance. After our lit review, we formulated relevant interview questions for our intended pool of participants, consisting of practitioners, experts, and individuals working in academia, the nonprofit sector, the private sector, the statutory sector, working in the areas of Stalkerware and also broadly within cybersecurity, domestic abuse, or tech-facilitated abuse. The intention with these interviews was to gather information of the first-hand experiences, knowledge, and concerns of research working on and around Stalkerware. Just this week, we entered the final phase of our research, which is the online survey. And you can find the link here on the screen, and you are encouraged to participate, in fact. As with our interviews, we're seeking participants, as I just mentioned, among practitioners, experts, individuals working on cybersecurity, domestic abuse, tech-facilitated abuse, particularly within academia, the nonprofit sector, the private sector, the statutory sector, and the media, that have some connection with Stalkerware and IPV. The intention with the survey is to delve deeper and reflect on the insights from our previous interviews and moving towards specifically a shared definition and understanding of the field. Once the survey is completed, because as I mentioned, this is currently live, we will do a more in-depth analysis across our data sources, and then we will be distributing our research results through both our partner, Chayn, and potentially UCL. I will now leave the floor to Jay, who will give an outline of our findings so far.
Thanks, Maddalena. Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Neuner. So at the beginning of this talk, we started to talk around the question, what is Stalkerware? And while we gave our working definition, the reality is that, as we've noted, Stalkerware just does not have a universally agreed definition. Some researchers and experts have developed and published detailed classifications of apps considered to be Stalkerware. Others will share what they feel could be part of that category. And that's not to say that either approach is wrong, right? But we do aim to help coalesce a shared definition of Stalkerware from the reviewed literature and insights from the experts themselves. And so, as noted again by Thomas, the working definition we have is technologies used to stalk or spy on others' activities via their infected devices. But we've been exploring each of these words kind of separately in our conversations with the experts. So for example, which technologies specifically are stalkerware? Do they have to have been technologies marketed or created with the purpose of stalking or spying? What functionalities make something stalkerware? Does the technology have to operate in a specific way? So for example, being covert rather than overt to be classified as stalkerware. And as I share more about the terminology we've been exploring, I want to encourage you to visit Slido, that's sli.do, and enter the event code 95917. There you can think on the question of what terminology you may have come across in your own work that relates to the kind of tech abuse we're describing here. So again, we've used the term stalkerware a lot, but many other terms are in use as evidenced through the literature we reviewed and the interviews conducted to date. It seems that some other terms are used interchangeably, like spyware, for example, though many have noted that this is actually a much broader category of app, often more affiliated with state-based cyber attacks and the like. Other terms that are used about apps with similar monitoring or tracking purposes include parental control apps, and more recently in this new age of remote connectivity, bossware, so employee monitoring apps. And other terms that have also cropped up but are not necessarily widespread include spouseware and creepware. The actions associated with stalkerware are also given variations in terms of how they're described, sometimes being called a form of violence or coercion, harassment, or stalking. This is also contrasted sometimes to what experts consider quote unquote real stalking in some contexts. So for example, physical tracking in person and physical violence, but in many cases, they noted that these were kind of intricately tied, let's say. And we've also seen some interesting trends emerging when it comes to discussion of the intimate partner violence and gendered framings of our research. Our primary focus there is not to delineate these trends, but we have superficially found a concentration of language focused on partners, wives, spouses, and direct allusion to the prevalence of use by men against women in the context of intimate partner violence. These complexities and these differing kind of terms used in the field, they've, as my colleagues noted, made it difficult to create a simple search for coverage on this topic, even to develop a coding structure for our results, and to formulate our interview and survey questions to be as open to varying language use as possible. But this complexity is one of the main reasons we chose to look at the state of knowledge in this realm, as there's really the significant need to untangle this web to inform better research on stalkerware. So how exactly does stalkerware work? In general, someone attempting to use stalkerware needs physical access to the device and/or password access, so privileged access, to the operating system-wide permissions. So, being allowed to download something and different access needs that the app would have. So that could include a device password, an app store password. And this enables the person deploying the app, the targeted app, to ensure they get the permissions that the app needs. Again, things like logging keystrokes, accessing location data, etc. But the answer to avoiding getting stalkerware on your phone is not as simple as don't give someone else your phone or don't give them your password. For one thing, in situations of abuse, this is not always possible. And furthermore, many people just in general don't practice good cyber safety. For example, they allow others to use their passwords to access their phones or allow others to see their screens while they're using their devices. And some researchers testing applications they've identified of stalkerware have also found that some operating systems seem to allow the deployed app more permissions than others. So for example, the Android operating system seems to be in this way a bit less secure than the Apple iOS operating system in defending against stalkerware deployment. This again is where definitions and classification come into play. There's the question of whether stalkerware includes native operating system functions or even apps that just gather large amounts of data like Facebook, of course, which different researchers and practitioners have different opinions about. This variation in functionality, and specifically the functionality that is strictly associated with stalkerware, means that categorizing and really critically identifying apps as stalkerware is difficult. For example, parental control apps, when used by parents to check on their children, use similar functionalities. So are they stalkerware? And finding evidence of stalkerware's presence on a phone is still limited and could easily be misinterpreted. Current detection mechanisms are things like noticing your device battery life is decreasing more rapidly, or seeing notifications about apps that you're maybe not so familiar with, the device taking more time to start up or to load. But there can be any number of reasons these things happen on a device anyway. So there's a possibility that a person might think their device has stalkerware on it when, in fact, their partner has access to the device directly and can therefore simply access their apps and data, or is checking up on them in some other way. Alternatively, the affected individual might believe certain things that happen on their device are simply things they don't remember doing or are normal functionality, or similar when, in fact, they do have stalkerware installed on their device. And currently, the anti-malware and antivirus products out there, they don't do a great job of identifying these apps. And then when it comes to stalkerware technologies, who exactly is making them? We didn't choose, as we mentioned, to investigate and map the ecosystem behind stalkerware, but the literature we've reviewed and conversations with experts indicate it would not have been a simple task. These stalkerware producing companies, they pop in and out of existence. They hide behind new names. And as with the transnational nature of the internet, the ability of anyone, anywhere to create such a product and distribute it, and anyone, anywhere to download the apps makes tracking down and legislating against stalkerware companies difficult. Some research has been conducted on where stalkerware apps can be purchased or downloaded, but understanding what brings a perpetrator to do so, to even go find that app in the first place, is a potential area for future research, and a critical one at that. Which brings us to the question of really who is using stalkerware and intimate partner violence. There's limited research again on the perpetrators of these technologies. We don't know necessarily too much about their demographics. We can guess in some cases at their motivations, but there's no empirical research on that. User journeys, their day-to-day use of the technologies, all of these remain open questions. And in the context in which we are examining stalkerware, intimate partner violence, we do believe that the predominant users are people in relationships or previously in relationships. These apps are marketed to examining stalkerware. These apps are marketed to them with language such as, "Is your wife cheating on you? Use this app to find out." So we know which target audiences they're likely getting with such ads, such language, but whether these were people who were already perpetrating other forms of harassment, abuse, and violence, or whether stalkerware apps are predominantly their first foray into such actions is not entirely clear. Again, direct research with perpetrators past or present is limited. As for who is affected, seemingly the effects are directly on the targeted partners themselves because they're the ones using the affected devices. This is at least something that we've seen commonly cited. But it's possible that other affiliated individuals, including others physically near the affected devices, for example, other victims who might be in a domestic abuse shelter, or other people who use the devices in addition to the targeted partner, like dependent children, may be affected as well. Detailed research just has not been conducted here. And underpinning all of this is the question of why stalkerware and intimate partner violence. Again, we don't have too much knowledge on the motivation of perpetrators or the motivation of stalkerware producing companies and their developers. And it is likely that such motivations would be connected in a more general way to motivations, for example, on the part of perpetrators on stalking and harassing in general, on the companies perhaps just making money. But again, direct empirical research on that remains limited. So looking a little bit more specifically at the different pieces of data that we've gathered so far, when it comes to our literature review, we've noticed somewhat interestingly that most of the publications were coming out of Australia, the US, and the UK, though a big caveat there that we did only conduct our search on English language publications due to the collective language abilities of our research team. We kept our relevance settings quite broad at first, using any mention of stalkerware in the context of intimate partner violence. And we found that many of our kind of eventually whittled down 200 pieces were focused on discrete incidents. So mostly those out of news media saying that somebody had experienced the use of stalkerware in an intimate partner violence context as just a single news piece or general advice for good cyber hygiene. But a handful of more in-depth research pieces on stalkerware use in intimate partner violence did stand out, and we'll share a bit more about those in a minute. But these pieces often seem to center on three particular methodologies. One was legal analysis, so understanding what policies in specific jurisdictions were or could be used against stalkerware. Technical analysis, such as how the apps operate on different devices' operating systems. And content analysis, so back to that point about marketing and advertising language, looking at that's used by the stalkerware producing companies. And the texts you see here were the ones that we found to be foundational for our work in understanding the terminology and framing our approach to the key issues in the field. These included the consumer spyware industry out of Deakin University and ACAN, the many kinds of creepware used for interpersonal attacks by researchers from NortonLifeLock, Cornell Tech, and New York University, the Predator in Your Pocket by the Citizen Lab and the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, and the spyware used in intimate partner violence by researchers out of Cornell Tech and Cornell University, New York University, Technion, and Hunter College. These are, to us, again, quite foundational, and we'd really recommend checking those out if you get the chance. And while we can't share too much at the moment about our interviews, as we've actually just completed them, I've peppered in a few insights from what I shared previously. And an interesting trend that was kind of reassuring in some ways to see this in these interviews was that there really is a lack of one shared definition for Stalkerware, just sort of pointing back to the need for this kind of research that we're conducting here. We've also seen some commonalities in how people reflected about the challenges across all sectors. Time and resources, those remain critical when it comes to engaging with the issue of intimate partner violence specifically, in general, but certainly with Stalkerware specifically. This, especially for the support sector, when it comes to dealing with Stalkerware, they may need further technical knowledge and upskilling as they deal with victims and survivors so directly. But this is, these challenges are pretty universal, it seems, across the different sectors we examined, according to the researchers we spoke to. And the people we've spoken to have also shared some further research needs for the field that we found notable, including more information needed on the prevalence of Stalkerware use in intimate partner violence. So hard data and where that could come from. There's lots of ideas floating out there, but they all seem pretty difficult to tackle. So, for example, getting direct access to many sufferers' devices to kind of see whether there's Stalkerware on there, things like that. And so that just remains, that and the attack of survivors, the impact on survivors remains an area for further research as well. And as I mentioned before, it was interesting to hear a lot of fields kind of saying, we don't know these things and, we don't know sort of what we don't know, that kind of phenomenon. So that was a bit reassuring in seeing that our research into the state of knowledge could be helpful for this broader work. And as Maddalena briefly mentioned, we will be gathering further insights via our just launched survey that runs through August 10th. We do encourage your participation if you feel that you fit the criteria. The link is displayed on the slide, or you can email us at STEaPP, STEaPP, Stalkerware at ucl.ac.uk. And now I will turn it over to Tomas.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right. So now that we have shown you our work and given you a glimpse into the current state of Stalkerware and its application in intimate partner violence, what is next? As mentioned, our project is concerned with mapping out the existence of knowledge on the subject and noting who is working on it, what topics are being covered, where it's being covered from, and so on. Now, I wanted to quickly make a point to say why we chose to present at Hope and give two reasons specifically. We wanted to make sure we gave airtime to our project, firstly, to continue raising awareness on the subject and look for people to engage with us and others working in the area. Secondly, though, we also wanted to specifically present that Hope because we feel that the community of people presenting and attending the conference have key knowledge on technologies and their construction, knowledge that could very well be useful for all these aspects of the realm of Stalkerware that are not covered yet. So what is needed in the field? There is, as one might expect, a need for further research. Through our conversations with researchers thus far and our own insights from the literature review, interviews, and so on, we have come up with an initial list of areas that are either missing attention, knowledge, or resources. Though I do encourage you again to go to Slido and insert your own ideas into how you think the Hope community themselves could become part of dealing with this problem. So to highlight a few points, with survivors, there is a need for more data on the prevalence of Stalkerware use in intimate partner violence. While we know Stalkerware is a technology that is increasingly in use, it is hard to quantify how much it truly is used. This becomes even more complicated when we understand that Stalkerware can encompass a variety of technologies that are sourced and talked about in different ways. If we were to know what is used and where, or at least have a clearer understanding of it, policymakers and the general public could adapt and address the threats specific to where they are and who they are through education, better personal security practices, and many other methods. Moreover, survivors, there's a need for useful advice. useful tools. As we have noted, there are varying concerns regarding the technical knowledge and experiences of the people affected by Stalkerware. We mentioned that our interviewees mentioned that often it is bad security practices that cause data and privacy loss. However, it never hurts to have advice, and particularly advice that is untechnical or less technical, so that it may be applied by people with perhaps not as much tech expertise. This is a short list of there is a short list of some publications providing advice to survivors. If you are curious, all these publications and more are linked at the end of the presentation, and we are also happy to be contacted to provide further links and thoughts. So, and then kind of moving onto the actions that are needed regarding the Stalkerware itself and the economy around it. While much more work has been done on the technical aspects of Stalkerware, there is little understanding of the supporting structures behind the business. Future research into the subject could seek out to map out the commercial procedures and related corporate actors involved in producing Stalkerware. Along these lines, documenting the business strategies and revenue streams would also be interesting and useful. The idea behind this research is derived yet again from the conversations we have had throughout the project with participants and internally. If advocacy groups and policymakers knew how these systems worked, they would be able to campaign for and pass legislation regulating Stalkerware at the business level. Finally, for frontline workers, there is also a need for a conversation regarding what can be provided to them. There is a need, again, for useful tools and mostly accessible knowledge and tools that provide frontline workers with something to use to help protect the people that are showing up affected by Stalkerware or potentially affected by Stalkerware. These tools could include steps for detection, how to preserve evidence for legal use, and the basic steps to protect individuals who come into the shelter looking for help. As a final point here, policymakers, the judiciary, and the statutory sectors, and the public at large require really education and awareness of the problem. And there is a need to kind of consider the wider societal impact of Stalkerware, and importantly for the people like judges, policymakers, police, and so on, who are having to work with people potentially affected or legislate on the subject of Stalkerware. There is a need, again, for accessible knowledge, accessible tools to really understand the problem. With all that said, what did we mean by the Hope community having an important knowledge? Well, here are some thoughts. What can you do? Well, as a few ideas, we think potentially the Hope community could help create accessible detection and removal tools for people with little to no tech backgrounds, and investigate deeper into any and all aspects of Stalkerware that we have mentioned or any that we might have missed. Talk about Stalkerware, raise awareness, promote safe practices on the part of individuals, and importantly, promote conscious programming of technologies so that software producers avoid creating more technology that could be used as Stalkerware. And like we have previously stated, and I'll plug it in one last time, you are obviously invited to participate in our online survey. The link was provided previously, but we can put it back on if people are interested. And finally, some concluding thoughts. Stalkerware is a complex tech and societal issue. Conversations with researchers on the subject have helped us understand the intricacies of current state of the technology and the context. Throughout our work, we have heard a variety of proposed solutions, often depending on the background of the individual proposing them. However, a realization many have had is that you can have the most sophisticated tech to fight the problem, but the problem at its root is societal. We need to ask, why are people producing this technology? Why is it seen as normal to surveil a partner, or any plethora of questions that are really digging at the root of the problem and kind of linking again back to the fact that we're not just talking about technology, but we're talking about an intersection of technology and its impact on human relationships. Thank you for attending our presentation and engaging with us. Stalkerware remains a concerning topic, and it requires action of many kinds. Our project will be going on until early September, and at which point we will start looking at options to share our results, both through UCL and Chayn. And yes, we will be going into time for questions, I think. So please feel free to ask away, and thank you again for your time.
Absolutely. It is indeed time for questions. Thank you so much. And again, we would like to thank you, Tomas Bermudez, Maddalena, Esposito, and Chayn Neuner. Again, this is From Cyberstalking to Spyware. What do we know about stalkerware and intimate partner violence situations? Hope attendees are absolutely welcome to ask questions in the Matrix chat. We do have a two-part question from the audience, so I will start with part one, and when you're ready, let me know for part two. The question is part of the problem for digital IPV a normalization or cultural expectation of oversharing in relationships that includes things like passwords or accounts or devices, etc.?
So I'll take this first question. So our study specifically hasn't necessarily, because we've had to focus on the state of knowledge and focus on the research aspect and the people doing the research. It's hard to truly answer, but I will say that one of the reasons why we started looking at this subject in the first place was that there was interest on the part both of UCL and Chayn and other organizations to look into this subject, as they were finding that this was a problem that perhaps they were encountering more often. And so perhaps there is some truth to this point of normalization and the cultural expectation of oversharing. It's the thought that because this technology enables people to stalk more easily, perhaps it is kind of the societal that we need to perhaps often focus on. Hopefully that answered. So.
Yeah, if I can jump in, maybe.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think this is something that has been pointed out to us in a couple of interviews, that normalization of surveillance in romantic relationships is definitely part of the problem. So I don't know if oversharing fits within the umbrella of like surveillance within intimate relationships, because obviously between sharing and surveilling, like there's different power dynamics. But in terms of like giving passwords, giving access to accounts or devices, that seems to be very normalized according to some researchers that we interviewed. So that's probably a yes, at least on my end, or from my opinion.
Great, thank you. Next question. Hope has had some other talks this week concerning domestic violence. Can you explain simply why victims are blamed and why victims are often misportrayed as being sexually loose, immoral, etc.?
Sure, I can take this one. So, we can't speak to why some individuals choose to frame the conversation that way. I will put words into my co-researchers' mouths and say that this is something that it's just not the approach that should be taken to domestic violence. Again, in terms of the actual approach that our research took, it wasn't about this framing and kind of the engagement with victims in that way. We were very much looking at the research field of the use of this technology in these contexts. So, I regret that we certainly can't kind of answer that in a more well-researched kind of empirical way, but it's obviously a major issue societally. It has many roots, from misogyny to racism, many sexism in general, transphobia. There's so many reasons that these framings come up. It's just something that we as individuals, again, I'll speak on behalf of us all, I think, just reject wholeheartedly. So we hope that our research can help to kind of explain a little bit more about what's going on, and hopefully that can start to shift the conversation. Again, speaking a bit editorially there.
So to kind of, again, dovetail with that, do you think it's beneficial to talk about intimate partner violence at the same time as talking about other crimes? It sometimes seems that intimate partner violence is approached as being a less serious violation.
So I'm happy to follow up on this one, and very much kind of agreeing with what Jay just said and echoing that and saying that I think tying this question in, it's important to talk about and mention intimate partner violence a lot more now and increase awareness, because so often there's a problem with people either putting it down as the question, the person submitting the question said, and saying that it is perhaps less serious. But I believe, and I think perhaps my co-researchers agree, that indeed this is a very, very important issue. And the lens that we took in looking at Stalkerware allowed us to look into just one aspect of this. But in our research, we spoke with people, organizations, which are involved in kind of the wider helping people who are subject to intimate partner violence and domestic abuse, or however we define it. And quite often what they highlighted was that Stalkerware was just one of the many problems that they were encountering, and that this is in fact an issue that as a society we need to address and take more seriously.
Next question, can you summarize what you know about differences across cultural groups or different countries? Presumably there are also big differences in reporting and law enforcement responses across different cultures and different countries.
I'm happy to take this one. I think so. For what we've done so far, for what we've done in our research so far, we can't speak to the differences between cultural groups, but rather what we know is that there's research and conversations happening more in the global north. So in the UK, as Jay mentioned before, the US, Australia, Canada, and there are, however, like in our interviews, or at least like from the ones that I conducted, what I remember is that there are definitely differences in reporting and law enforcement specifically, because there's different legislative frameworks that protect either the producers of these technologies or victims of domestic violence and IPV. So one thing that has been pointed out, for instance, is that many of these companies are based in Thailand or India, but there's no conversation happening right now in these two countries, for instance, whereas there's more conversation happening in, as I said, the global north. But still, even when there is, even when the crimes are reported, even when victims and survivors seek law enforcement help, it's still like, these issues are not really picked up, or victims are not believed, the crimes are minimized. So there's definitely, so from what we know from our research so far, a difference between the conversation and the research and the law enforcement between countries like, the countries where the Stalkerware is produced and the countries where, there's currently research academically like going on. And also within these countries, still a very big gap in law enforcement following up on requests. But I think also in victims actually reporting the crime, because this is really underreported as a crime. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time. Do any of the three of you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience going forward?
Just a big thanks, and we hope that you've taken away from this some good knowledge that you can bring into your own work, whether it be in technical realm or any others, just to be aware of how technology can be used and misused, and certainly the motivations that go into creating different technologies. It's something that I think we all personally have found very interesting in this research, and we hope that fellow technical people and researchers can bring that to their work as well.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much, Tomas Bermudez, Maddalena Esposito, and Jay Neuner. This has been From Cyberstalking to Spyware. What do we know about stalkerware and intimate partner violence situations? Thank you again for your time and your presentation. We are going to pass it back over to ground control.
Thank you so much.